Welcome, everyone. My name is David Wood, and it's my pleasure to chair London Futurists. We live in uncertain times. Following a number of recent events, it has become increasingly difficult to forecast the future with any confidence. As a short introduction to today's webinar, before I hand over to our distinguished panelists, let me briefly highlight 5 points of uncertainty. First, it is uncertain how quickly AI capability will continue to increase and how long it will take before AI lies fully beyond human understanding and human control. Second, it is uncertain what are the most effective ways for humanity to fully benefit from the positive potential of AI in fields such as climate control, international diplomacy, science, engineering, and medicine. Third, conversely to the potential for profound benefit, there is potential for dreadful harm. But this too is subject to considerable debate and uncertainty regarding which kinds of threats are the most credible, the most pressing, and the most important. Fourth, it is uncertain which technical changes in the design and operation of AI are most likely to lower the probability of catastrophic outcomes and to increase the chance of safe AI deployment. And fifth, last on this list, turning from technical changes to political changes, it is uncertain which government policies, such as which regulations and which incentives, are most likely to lower the risks and increase the potential massive benefits from forthcoming new generations of AI. So there is a great deal of uncertainty, but none of that means we should give up. There are indeed important new initiatives in all these 5 areas, seeking to reduce that uncertainty and paint a clearer picture of what may lie ahead and what we can all do. These initiatives deserve our attention, and they point to some possible good routes forward. One of these routes is actually described not as a multi-lane highway, but as a narrow path. Today, we're going to be hearing more about this narrow path and about the bigger picture of what's driving people to develop AI in increasingly risky ways. We'll also be hearing from a number of independent experts on the pros and cons of possible mechanisms for the governance of new AI systems. To set the scene, I'll now pass the microphone first to Chris Scammell, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Conjecture and one of the principal authors of a document entitled The Compendium. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Thanks for organizing this and for bringing energy to this subject and to all my fellow panelists. I'll try to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes and give the quickest version of the summary of AI risks that I'm concerned about that I can. This is the story that's presented in the compendium. Yeah, Andrea, thanks for linking that in the chat log. And for those who can't see it, it's thecompendium.ai. The compendium is a summary of arguments that has tried to pare down to a few different sections the tightest arguments that myself and members of Conjecture, the company I work at, have picked up over the last few years of working on this subject. And it covers a lot. It starts with what's going on in the present day. It talks about intelligence as a mechanistic process. It goes on to talking about what happens if these early theses are true and you can mechanize intelligence and build artificial general intelligence. And then it goes on to talking about the current state of safety, governance, and the race itself. Our view is that all of this is in a pretty bad place. So I'll make the case for that. But I think this is a complex subject where the one thing that we know is it's moving extremely fast. And as David said, there's many uncertainties. The core thesis that we have around a lot of the dangers is something along the lines of right now the burden of proof is reversed around safety, which is that we are racing towards something that could potentially be extremely powerful and extremely dangerous. And the current default position the world has is let's wait and see for this to get really bad before we react. And yet, pretty much everyone who takes this field seriously thinks if it could get this powerful, its potential to impact the world is extremely large. So I'll walk you through that argument quickly and hopefully make it clear as I can. I'm going to share screen here and just share the actual compendium document online. Could a fellow panelist tell me if the text is large enough to see?
Looks good to me.
Cool. All right, so starting from the state of AI today, I imagine everyone on this call is familiar with ChatGPT and how quickly things have been moving here. But to quickly summarize, the last 5 years have seen incredible progress. We've gone from models that could barely speak English and barely grammatically correct sentences to models that pass PhD level tests. All of this has been driven by a paradigm of scaling. What this means is that previously, the history of AI advances was driven by huge algorithmic breakthroughs, these kind of paradigm shifts where you went from one way of doing AI to a new way of doing AI, and suddenly a whole bunch of new use cases were unlocked. That has kind of stopped because what's happened is with the latest paradigm that we've entered, a paradigm of deep learning, what we can do is now just feed our systems more and more data, and the same types of algorithms are working to achieve crazy results with no real change in underlying algorithm, only an increase in data, the amount of compute that these models are trained on, and the amount of time and money that is put in. This is what's driven models to go from being able to speak grammatically correct sentences to ones that are able to solve extremely hard problems and do real world work. And so all of that is what's causing both the hype and the concern today. Somehow it's gotten much, much, much easier to make progress. And we're seeing that progress play out, and models are doing things in the world. And we don't need a huge breakthrough to think about how this could keep going. So this leads to the idea that AI progress is driven by resources right now, not insights. And here you can see a chart of how a lot of capabilities have increased across many different tests just in the last few years, simply from scaling up these models. The short answer to, hey, is this progress going to continue, is yes. Largely, this paradigm is driven by data. It's also driven by power to run the data centers where these models are trained. And there's a few different things that could block our ability to make more powerful models, which is shown here in this chart. Power constraints, chip production capacity, data scarcity, and the latency wall. And what analysts have seen is roughly, or what they predict is roughly, we don't expect to hit any limits in scaling until 2030. And so what this means, just on kind of napkin math analysis, is that we expect that the progress that we've seen in the last 5 years is something that can continue for another 6 years. And we've seen orders of magnitude jumps in capabilities. We've seen grammatically correct to college level to PhD level. What would it mean for things to go from PhD level to orders of magnitude more powerful than that? This thesis is held by many people right now. This is a thesis that the machine learning community takes seriously, that accelerationists take seriously, that doomers take seriously. Lots of different people consider this to be a roughly scientifically driven thesis at this point, that we can continue to train more powerful models. The question is, what will these do? How powerful will they become? Certainly they'll get stronger, but what types of capabilities will that unlock? And the short answer is, we don't really know. This has led to a split in how people are thinking about this. Most of the industry is now racing to build AGI. And so what you see is a lot of leading companies like OpenAI, DeepMind, Anthropic, Elon Musk's xAI, all of them have in their mission statement this idea that they're going to build artificial general intelligence, which they claim is an AI that is as capable as a human and could potentially do any single task that a human could do. This is the goal of these companies right now, and many of them are now backed by huge big tech companies that are funneling billions into building more and more powerful systems. And so this is the thesis of, hey, it's going to work. We think that this scaling is really going to get there. And if anyone was checking Twitter this morning, recently Sam Altman just said, yes, I expect AGI by 2025. And here he's referring to a system that should be able to be as powerful and do anything that a human could do. I take this thesis seriously as well. I think that the future could hold models like this very soon. And I think it is resource constrained in the sense that right now there's not a huge technical blocker. It's really just a matter of time and data going into this. The last section of this introduction, which is quite important to understand, is that AI is grown, not built. And what this means is that with traditional code, what you're doing is you're writing each line of your program kind of step by step. And you're understanding what that first line does and the second line does so that you have an overall sense of the program in general. And when multiple people are collaborating on a project such as like Microsoft Windows, at least everyone knows a little bit about what's going on, such that the whole program is roughly understood by the various minds that are looking at it. This is not how AI works. With AI, we have a single algorithm that we feed data to, and it pulls patterns out of this data. What this is in kind of a closer analysis is you could imagine, well, let's talk about a language model, for example. A language model is trained to predict where text goes. And so it learns to speak and write simply from seeing everything that's already been written and pulling out the patterns from that to say, here's how I'm going to write, or here's how I'm going to innovate a new sentence. There's something that happens just by showing all of this data that exists before, where it pulls out the pattern and then knows how to do that next thing. And when we zoom in on this, the problem that we see is that we're not writing a program to create text line by line. We found some sort of pattern, and by giving it more data, we've got a more sophisticated and intelligent pattern. And at the end of the day, we may have something that is artificial general intelligence, where we don't understand a single line of how it's been written. That's the current state that we're in. And a lot of what follows is extrapolated from this current situation. Things are moving fast. Companies are trying to build AGI. And fundamentally, we don't really know how these models work. It's very, very different from traditional code. So the question then is it possible to build AGI? I'll be short on this because it's a rather kind of technical subject, and I think the document says it best. But there's roughly two positions here. One is it's not really that complicated to make intelligence. The other is intelligence is extremely hard to make, and it's this mystical thing that we're not really going to be able to make traction on, and it's something humans have that is quite special. This is a simplification and a reduction of the complexity of the situation, but I'm roughly in the first camp, which is that you can think of intelligence as something that humans have in their head, or you could just think of intelligence as what are all the steps that comprise any particular task that you have to complete. And if you're able to automate each of those steps, then you might be able to automate the whole intellectual task. And if you imagine that for all intellectual tasks, you might just be able to automate intelligence. And so from this view, the question is there a particular intellectual task that we can't automate? Because if we can automate all of them, then it is technically possible to build AGI. Without diving too much into the weeds here, I roughly believe it is possible to automate all tasks, and that's the process that will lead to AGI. So what happens if we could create artificial general intelligence? Some people say, well, it'll speed up the economy. I'm in the position of, if you can do any intellectual task that a human can do, you can very quickly do any intellectual task that humanity can do. This has to do with two things. One, it has to do simply with what is within the realm of possible of all tasks that humans can do. And it also has to do with the difference between biological intelligence, what humans have in their heads, and machine intelligence, stuff that's on a GPU. Starting with the difference between humans and artificial intelligence is simply the fact that we've written programs to run much, much, much more efficiently than what happens in the human brain. And when you think about the speed of computation of what a computer can do versus what a human can do, and how much kind of energy it takes to run a physical human body and brain versus run a computer, the odds are not in our favor. Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, which is one of the leading companies trying to build AGI right now, recently described AGI as something that could look like a country of geniuses in a data center. And what he means by this is you could imagine that if you're able to create an AI system that is as powerful as a human, and you have a bunch of copies of that, and they're all running really, really quickly, it's something like a civilization in a data center being able to think extremely fast. If you can get these systems to coordinate, if you can get them to do intellectual work, they can work just like a person, but also a company, but also a country, also humanity. All of this is simply scale. It's a matter of taking the same program that can do the work of a human and multiplying it. The fact that we can very easily copy programs from one computer to another and reprogram them among themselves so that if one of them learns something, the next one can learn it, means that AI has huge advantages over what humanity can do. And so what you're looking at is very quickly, if you do reach the capabilities of a human, you scale extremely fast up to what we call superintelligent and potentially godlike intelligent systems. This is using somewhat science fiction and heavy language here, but it's to convey the idea that most of the time when we think about intelligence, we're comparing the intelligence of one human to another human. But it's a totally different calculation if we're comparing the intelligence of a human to that of humanity. Imagine what I could do versus all of the scientific work that's happening in all of academia. It's not even close. It's a comparison that doesn't really make sense. This is the same type of comparison that we could be talking about with superintelligent systems versus a single human. And so with that frame going into what we could create if we're able to build AGI, if Dario is right and we can build a country of geniuses in a data center within the next few years, we're looking at a situation where you can imagine AI as a foreign actor, as a foreign country that is competing with humans or amongst the resources and ideas and tasks that we have for its own share of, or for pursuing its own goals and its own competition. So this leads to a bunch of theses. This leads to the idea of AI as a threat simply due to its power and its divergence from humans and what it's trying to get at. There's a bit of a tricky problem here that I'll get to in a second. And it leads to a bunch of governance ideas, which is roughly, some people are thinking about keeping AI safe as a matter of just having it follow our intent. But if you think about the power of AI as something like a country of geniuses in a data center, you need governance mechanisms that look like how you manage nation states. Andrea will be able to speak more to this in a second, but that poses the level of problem that we're looking at here with AI that could be this smart. To quickly go over my view of where the current safety is at, we don't have what it takes to keep this safe, in my view. A lot of safety research right now is approaching this from the perspective of we can quickly iterate, and when there's a problem, we'll fix that problem and replace it with some system that's safer. The thesis that I'm approaching this from is if you could create a country of geniuses in a data center within the next few years, we can't wait to see what these problems are. We're going to need to think ahead of time and potentially prevent ourselves from being able to get into that position in the first place. Because if we're trying to reckon with AI that powerful without the resources to do it, we're going to be in trouble. To be explicit about the trouble that we're talking about here, it is very possible to imagine extinction from AI systems. I think it's important to underscore this, not to promote fear, but to say, like any sort of existential threat, a system that can quickly become more powerful than us poses a real risk of humans not being in charge of the future anymore. We can discuss exactly how that would happen later, but in the same way that humans are so powerful that animals really can't do anything to us, if an AI system can very quickly reach levels that are super intelligent and beyond humans, we could do very little to stop it. On governance, Andrea will have a lot more to say on this, but the short version of this is most of the governance efforts today are also kind of in the paradigm of let's wait and see what happens and regulate then. We're waiting for something to scare us so that we can build common knowledge and then create a degree of getting together and thinking about a different solution in the same way that we reacted to COVID, for example. But if we have AI that's coming extremely quickly, we can't afford to be reactive and wait for this to arrive. It's also the case that reactivity itself requires certain institutions to be in place to do the right thing when the problem arises. And so we want to make sure that those are there before we end up in trouble, not responding once that trouble arises. Finally, there's a question of, okay, if AI can be really powerful, if it can pose certain dangers, why are we racing towards the frontier in the first place? And this is a genuine question because I think right now there's a common narrative that's all of this doom stuff is just hype. It's companies saying this is going to be really powerful to get more investment and more attention and to capture public interest. A really cursory look under the surface at the history of where these companies come from shows that that's not the case. And that for pretty much any individual who is leading one of these companies, their history ties in together with what's called the singularitarian movement, which is a group of individuals who for a long time have believed that it is possible to build AGI, that we can do it in our lifetimes, and that AGI will create transformative effects on civilization and potentially for generations to come. Potentially, like this is humanity's last chance to develop the technology to steer the course of the future. This is kind of a crazy point because I think a lot of people believe that those building AI are just in it for commercial interests. That's not actually the case. I can give some examples in a second. But actually, maybe one of the kind of most striking examples is an email thread between Elon Musk and the founders of OpenAI, where Elon himself says, the creator of AGI will have humanity's future in their hands. Or rather, he says, I don't think OpenAI is going to be able to pull it off. Unfortunately, humanity's future is in the hands of blank. So behind the scenes in these emails that were released, you can see that the conversations that founders of these companies are having is who's going to steer the ship of the future. This is particularly relevant now that the election has happened in the US and Elon likely has a lot more power. This really is the game that's being played right now. There are many other actors in this space. There's accelerationists, there's effective altruists. All of these actors are interested in what AGI could become and where it's going, and all of them roughly take it super seriously. So on our analysis, looking at all of this, we're in a bad position right now because with the speed of the race being what it is, the fact that we expect progress to be able to continue, and the fact that people are ideologically driven to create this really powerful technology, what happens is that safety becomes an afterthought. Right now, the race is the primary thing, and people are really trying to get to this threshold first. And then what follows from that is a reduction in taking safety as seriously as it should be, both in the technical aspects and the governance aspects. I'm going to hold off on this last section here, which is talking about how to get to a good future and what participation might look like in that. I think this is something that comes best after we talk about governance and what's like really needed for the overall vision. But the short version of this is there's a lot we can still do. So yeah, I'll close out there and get a drink. Thanks.
Many thanks. There's lots to think about there. And you've left us on tenterhooks, but we'll come back to that positive recommendation shortly. A quick call out to one of the audience, Bezir Vrayet, who's a futurist in Istanbul, Turkey, for being the first to put questions into the Q&A window. Later on, we will come to whatever questions are in there, which have got at least some support from the community of attendees by being upvoted. We don't need to come to them yet, and we should pay attention in the short term, at least to what the panelists are saying. But if something does strike any audience member clearly, by all means, drop a question into the Q&A window. So next, we're going to give the floor to Andrea Miotti, who is the executive director of an organization called Control AI. And he is, I think, the principal author, or at least the first named author, in the document A Narrow Path. Andrea.
Thank you, David, and yeah, nice to meet you, everyone. And yeah, I will try to keep my section shorter, and I would love to answer some questions. I think the first question from Bezir is really good. So, but yeah, following up on Chris's masterful and quite spooky description of where we are right now, the question is, okay, we see this problem, we see this massive challenge ahead of us. I personally think it doesn't matter too much whether it is in 1 year or 5 or 10. All of those timeframes are extremely soon for human speed, and especially the speed of governments, which are ultimately the bodies that usually can deal with this scale of risks. And so no matter what the timelines are, unless it's centuries, we need to deal with this, and we need to deal with this fast. And as Chris said, unfortunately, so on the bad news, I think we are in trouble, and it's going to be pretty hard to make it out of this. On the good news is that I do think there is a path, and hence I called the proposal that I worked on the narrow path. So there is one path. There are like perhaps more than one, not too many, and quite narrow, because we are in quite close to this moment, and we are in a pretty difficult situation. A lot of things that Chris described are, I will recap them very quickly. So AI that is smarter than humans across most tasks, definitely most tasks than one can do on a computer, is being actively built right now. There are tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars being inputted into this. We went from a situation where in around 2015, 2014, we had one single company ideologically trying to build this with relatively few resources, DeepMind. Now we have 5, 6, that's it's a very different world. They have orders of magnitude more money. And despite this, despite being over almost 10 years later, we have essentially still more regulation on sandwiches than on AI, and we are very, very, very behind in building the institutions and the rules and all the things that we need to make the future go well. So we have a lot of homework to do, but it can be done, and it can be done at speed, especially as people are realizing more and more what's coming. So we are facing this problem. We are facing superintelligence coming. Many companies are trying to build it. Some of these companies are trying to get governments in this game. What can we do? Well, the path that we recommend is in 3 phases. Phases 0, 1, and 2. Phase 0 is so named. It's not phase 1, it's phase 0, because the first thing that we need to do when we're facing with this level of risk is to stop facing this risk. Right now, we are barreling towards superintelligence. Some of the people developing this expect Russian roulette level odds of human extinction from it. Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, expects 10 to 25% chance of a catastrophe on the scale of civilization, which basically means every human dead. The first thing you should do when you're playing Russian roulette is to put down the gun, stop, and go play something else. So phase 0, the goal of phase 0 is we should prevent the development of superintelligence for at least the next 20 years. Why? Right now, we have no clue how to control intelligences that are vastly more powerful than us. This is an uncontroversial claim. I don't think any single company on the planet would claim that they know that they've cracked this very, very, very hard problem. Some might say one of the hardest problems that humanity ever faced. We have no idea how to control these systems once they're there. And worse, as Chris outlined a little bit before, we don't even know exactly where we're going to hit them. So there could be a different situation. For example, a situation where we were in with nuclear, even in its early stages, where we have a robust science of intelligence, a robust science and technology of intelligence, where we can make calculations in advance, we can understand the mechanics of how it is developed, and we could say, well, we've calculated beyond this level, we're going to have intelligences that are vastly beyond our control, so we should stop at this level and not beyond. We will still reap all of the benefits, but we will stay quite clear from crossing the threshold at which we're going to get overpowered. The reality is that we don't have this line. We don't know where this line is. We don't have the science to measure it. We don't have the engineering ability to constrain our systems in such a precise way to narrowly miss it. And so what we need to do is to be quite significantly conservative and stop well away from where we can guess this line is, and put in place all of the institutions, the technical measures, the regulations that we need to then make sure that we're not going to accidentally cross this line. We're not going to have rogue actors cross this line, even if actors that we regulate do so, and prepare for a more deliberate, a more intentional path where we are building AI that we understand, where we're building AI that we know how to control, and where we're building AI that is very powerful, but we know is going to be powerful for us, for humans, rather than just rolling the dice and hoping that whatever comes out of the other side is benevolent to us. And so the phase 0, what we propose in phase 0 is a series of measures and a series of principles that we should achieve. These conditions are: we should have no AIs improving AIs. We should have no AIs capable of breaking out of their environment. We should have no unbounded AIs, and we should find a way to limit the general intelligence of AI systems. All of these are conditions that, if we can meet them, we will be able, as species, to prevent superintelligence and at least cross that line deliberately rather than accidentally. Right now, we're just on track of stumbling across the line and then seeing what happens. Why these ones, and how can we do so? Well, briefly, first of all, we should have a guiding principle that countries around the world adopt, and definitely at least the major powers adopt, as we have done with other technologies in the past. This is nothing, in many ways, this is nothing new. This is how we have dealt successfully with other technologies that are extremely powerful in the past. Things like nuclear weapons. Yes, there are still many nuclear weapons around the world, but also we are here having this call because we haven't completely obliterated ourselves with them yet. We've only had 2 nuclear detonations in our history, and we are in a fragile regime, but one where we are still alive. And so the first principle should be prohibiting the development of artificial superintelligence until countries decide to lift this moratorium. This is an important guiding principle because it will indicate everything else that comes after that, everything else that is in concrete implementation of that, of indicating developing AI is completely fine. AI has many useful applications. Superintelligence is not. Superintelligence, until we know how to control it, it is not fine. This is the equivalent of a WMD. This is a weapon of mass destruction. It's worse. It's the equivalent of a successor species. We should not definitely we should not have civilians create successor species in their backyard, much like we don't let anybody build nukes in their backyard. And this should stay prohibited internationally. And then coming from that, there are a few other conditions that we need to meet. For example, even if we don't actively try to develop superintelligence, we can still stumble. Again, as I said before, we could just stumble across the finish line accidentally, since we don't know how to predict how powerful AIs will be before we build them. We don't have good measuring capabilities of intelligence even after the fact, let alone before. And so the second is we need AIs, we need to prohibit AIs that can just escape from their environment. Any safeguards we put on AIs, which can be restrict access to resources, limit their ability to interact with other humans online, limit their ability to interact with other AIs, and so forth, are going to be essentially containment measures. Things like not giving them API, not giving them root access to their machine, or not giving them the ability to access more compute that we want them to. But if AIs can just hack out of their environment, they're powerful enough to hack out of their environment, all of this is pointless. They will just, it's like locking somebody in a cell, but then giving them the key, right? That's a very, very lousy cell. And while this might sound like, well, surely nobody would let AI, we just build a cell and then give AI the key. We already have AIs right now that can escape out of their environment. We have already seen this happening in the wild. Most recently, in September this year, OpenAI released their new model 01, and in their own testing logs that they publicly released, so that's what they say publicly. Imagine what else is there, or what else could be there. They say that in one test where they tested how powerful the model would be on autonomously doing some hacking challenges, essentially, one challenge was bugged, so the model couldn't complete it. And the model found a way to complete it, which was to gain root access, kind of hack out of its own environment and gain root access to its own machine, restart it, and then complete the challenge after fixing it. This didn't end up too badly. It was still a testing environment, and there were other safeguards beyond that. But we already have AIs that can hack at the level of humans, if not at superhuman level. And if we just continue to build those and don't prevent this capability, no safeguard we put on them is going to be effective. Secondly, prohibiting the development of AIs that improve other AIs. And in the policy that we recommend, we define some new categories to make sure that we hit only the most dangerous types of this, rather than any form of code improving code. Like there's a lot of software in a strict reading of this. We could say, well, anyway, any software that is self-improving under a broad definition should be prohibited. That could help, but it would have a lot of negative externalities on things like self-updating databases, or some mundane applications where there's some code that improves other code that it's working on. So we only focus on what we call found systems. So AI that are not written by humans, but as Chris described, essentially they're grown. They're found via mathematical optimization. There's no human writing the lines of code. And with those, if we want to make sure that we don't stumble across the finish line, we should not have AIs that A, are capable of, B, are allowed to improve other AIs, other found systems. Otherwise, even if we keep, even if we put safeguards in place, they limit the general intelligence of these AI systems, and we put safeguards in place that don't let them hack out of these safeguards, if we just let them improve themselves, improve other AIs, or just intentionally do so ourselves, they will just zoom past this line that we're drawing in the sand again and zoom past the level of capabilities that we can manage. And again, this might sound like, why would anybody ever do this? Like, it's obviously stupid, right? It's been a century of both technologists and even science fiction warning about doing this kind of stuff. Companies are doing this right now. It's entertaining, perhaps, like slightly sad to see that a lot of the common sense lessons that we thought, even just in the early 2000s, like anybody in the field of AI and AI safety thought that nobody would plug AI to the internet, nobody would let them run out unsupervised, nobody would put them in a loop intentionally. Right now, the next generation of AI models is being significantly enabled by the current AI models. Companies like Anthropic are openly boasting about using their current model, Claude, to speed up the work of their engineers on the next Claude model. And OpenAI is saying the same. Microsoft, part owners of OpenAI are saying the same. So we are already in this feedback loop situation, and we need a clear normative and technical measure to say, no, we shouldn't do this. This is exactly how we stumble into catastrophe. And then I will go a bit more briefer on the other ones, but briefly, right now, as again Chris said, we develop AIs with no notion ahead of time of like how powerful they're going to be, what they're going to be capable of, and which is not how we approach any other critical engineering sector, right? Like when any civil engineer is planning a bridge, not even building a bridge, planning a bridge, they can make some calculations of what's the total amount of yield of cars that this bridge will hold, what's the strength of wind that this bridge will hold. When we build a nuclear power plant, we do the same. We have the ability to predict, like, is this amount of heat, is it going to melt the wall? Is it going to like make it go supercritical? And we build them to not have all of that stuff. And this comes from the concept of boundedness, of like knowing what are the kind of safe limits that we can operate in and knowing them in advance. So we can build and give only certain amounts of resources, a certain amount of energy to not cross these bounds. This is not how frontier AI development is being done right now. And we should move to that regime instead, a regime where the developers in advance know and can predict how powerful their AIs are going to be, know what they will be able to do and will not be able to do. And there are many ways to do this. Again, we can just learn from normal, common practices common in all major countries in other safety critical engineering sectors and apply them to the AI. There's been a bit of a movement recently on AI to push for the idea of safety cases, which are taken from the nuclear industry. That's excellent, but we need to do much, much more of that. And we need to make it mandatory, as it is in the nuclear sector, in the aviation sector, in the civil engineering sector. Otherwise, companies won't do it. And they're not doing it. And all of this can be done, a lot of this can be done, again, in practical terms, can be done similarly to the nuclear sector or the aviation sector by having national regulators national regulators and then international harmonizations of these measures that check, building plans, the equivalent of like plans to build nuclear reactors before they're allowed to continue, check that the companies are putting these measures in place, check the companies train their employees to not let AIs improve other AIs, not build AIs that escape out of their environment, have some form of reporting systems to make sure that if this happens accidentally, people can report it and can shut it down immediately. If this happens intentionally, there should be sanctions. And like exactly as we do with things like anti-money laundering in banks or safety and nuclear engineering. And this is, again, eminently possible. We've done it with nukes. We've done it with civilian nuclear. We've done it with aviation. We've done it with other sectors. We just have to do it. And we need to move on from this approach, like this purely laissez-faire approach that many of the same companies that are explicitly trying to build God are pushing against, of just don't regulate anything, just let us do what we want. And this would bring us to a situation where if major countries do this and major countries agree to implement this, we lead us to a situation where we don't have superintelligence for at least a decade, if not more. What next? This sounds like, oh, well, we've solved the problem. We haven't. Right now, our main threat is superintelligence. if we address that, we are going to be in a situation where our main threat, kind of similarly to how it's been across human history, is competition among ourselves, among humans. If we don't set up something else, there's going to continue to be competitive dynamics internationally where people will feel like, well, everybody else is restraining themselves from building this technology, but if I can only just skirt the rules a little bit, I can get ahead. We're going to have rogue actors that are still going to try. We're going to have people that will just not care about human extinction and still going to try. And so we will need some international institutions. When we move to phase one, where the main thing that we need to achieve is stability, an internationally stable system to make sure that these rules and these measures to prevent superintelligence and to steer AI development on a different path stay in place and don't collapse under international competition. And in this case, what we propose is, what conditions that need to be achieved are that we need to achieve non-proliferation. Essentially, the more powerful AI systems proliferate and the more the ability to build such systems proliferates, the more we face kind of uncorrelated, distributed chances of risk. In the same way that if anybody was able to build a fusion bomb in the backyard, we would probably be dead by now because there's just going to be no way to prevent the capability. If we get sufficiently powerful AI to proliferate, or the ability to build superintelligence to proliferate, we will either die or we will need to go to extremely unpleasant measures internationally to restrict the ability to do so. And there is another way. The other way is building international institutions now that can deal with this. One that would look like an IAA for AI, so monitoring the physical resource that powers all of this, computing power, which is easy to trace, easy to monitor, easy to measure. Monitor the countries that are adhering to this treaty and to this regime follow all of the phase zero rules, and help these countries kind of adjudicate disputes and help them figure out if somebody is not following the rules and find ways to rein them in. Two, we need to provide, and this is, I would say, the kind of the stick. Two, we need to provide a carrot. A lot of AI development is still going to be extremely useful if done in a controlled environment and if done in a controlled fashion. But if we just let anybody do it, we again risk this competition to the bottom and this competition dynamics that could break this safety regime. And so we propose to establish an international AI organization called GUARD that would be allowed to do some more experiments than what is allowed at a national level, and would have mutual monitoring by all member countries, and would be allowed to push some of the frontier in a much more controlled environment with military-grade security levels. And if we do this, we have achieved safety. We don't have superintelligence knocking on our door and taking over for the next 20 years. We've achieved stability. We can then move on to flourishing, phase two. With all of these things in place, we can now actually focus on the task of building the scientific foundations for a science and metrology of intelligence, for a way to build controllable AI that is under our control, that we know in advance how powerful it's going to be. We can bound like we bound nuclear reactions and other engineering fields, and we can harness it for the benefit of humanity. This will be a big scientific project, but it will be a very exciting scientific project. And we need to put all of these things in place, not just stumble into a superintelligence that we cannot control, and instead go into a deliberate future where humanity is in charge and humanity gets all the benefits from this. I will stop here and keen to
Thank you very much for also confining your remarks to 20 minutes. Everybody's been very good and disciplined so far. We now have an explosion of fascinating comments in the chat and in the Q&A, which we're going to struggle to address even a small part of, but we're all going to try our best. Before we look too closely at them, we're going to hear now from three independent experts on possible futures for AI. And the first of these is Robert Whitfield, who is the trustee chair of One World Trust. Robert, what are your thoughts that you'd like to share?
Right, thank you very much, David. Well, first of all, I'd like to speak on behalf of One World Trust and also for the World Federalist Movement, where I chair the Transnational Working Group on AI. And I first of all start with a positive bit. I mean, there are some good things that have been happening. So the leadership shown by the UK with the first AI Safety Summit in Bletchley Park last year was, I think, a big positive step. And that led to Seoul, that led to, we've now got the first summit of AI safety institutes taking place in 10 days' time in San Francisco. In the last year or two, we've been involved primarily engaging with the UN Global Digital Compact, with the Council of Europe's negotiations. But certainly in the Digital Compact, it got very bogged down, it seemed, by, on the one hand, geopolitics amongst the leading AI powers protecting their own interests. And then with the Global South wanting to engage in what was clearly a powerful technology, but not seeing this safety issues as a priority. And so generally in the GDC negotiations, there was very little sense of urgency and no sense of what we've been talking about now. So I would totally accept the evidence that we've been hearing about of the possibility of AGI within the near future. And that's why we would certainly strongly support the general thrust of a narrow path. I think it's an excellent and timely proposal. Its sense of urgency is absolutely right. Its three-phased approach seems highly appropriate. And with the first phase being phase 0, which sort of for me emphasizes the urgency. Similarly, I agree with just about everything in the compendium. And I thought coming in support of the narrow path was sort of a very effective way of going about things. In terms of the conclusions of the compendium, maybe we'll come on to that in a minute. First of all, I'd like to talk about one or two detailed things about the narrow path, and I'm particularly focusing on phase 0 because really that's the crucial bit. What is the first step that should be taken? And Andrea was listing the aims, the key things, elements in that phase 0. I may have missed it, but you didn't seem to have all the red lines that were identified, the 5 red lines in the IDAIS negotiations that have been going on with in Beijing. There were the 5 red lines, and for instance, you didn't seem to have power seeking or deception included in the red lines you were seeking to evolve. Secondly, there's the question of, I mean, your phase 0 treaty seems to rely upon each treaty signatory monitoring and enforcing respect for the treaty commitments in their own country. So the question is whether that would be acceptable to the other key players. And might it not be appropriate to have a jurisdictional certification approach, which has been suggested elsewhere, which could offer more assurance to other states, where the establishment of a body equivalent to ICAO in aviation is established to certify the national bodies tasked with approving specific AI systems. So the central body would not approve AI systems per se, it would satisfy the jurisdictions that have that responsibility. And it seems to work well in aviation, and it provides assurance to the treaty signatories that all participating states are honoring the treaty. But it also reduces the risk of industrial espionage, which might occur if the AI systems were certified directly or by a central body. And another key benefit of this jurisdictional certification approach is that the treaty can ban any imports or exports of AI systems or components that come from or are going to a state whose jurisdiction does not have approval. So that would act as a powerful incentive to draw in states that want to trade in AI systems or components. Because a key issue is how do we get people to sign up to this treaty to make the commitments in phase 0. And if you started with a good substantial number, then this approach would help draw in more states. But those are quite detailed points. I mean, perhaps if we sort of step back a moment, if we just touch on the election of President Trump, and clearly that adds of some new factors. He's said many things pointing in the direction of less regulation of AI, but at the same time, he has acknowledged that the situation is scary. We have the close involvement of Elon Musk. Now that's already been touched on, with his OpenAI involvement. But he has been consistently supportive of taking the AI dangers seriously. And let us therefore hope that that advice holds sway. And then we're told that Ivanka Trump sent her father a copy of Situation Awareness by Leopold Aschenbrenner, which is a very sobering paper spelling out how San Francisco sees the AI roller coaster planning out. We don't know how Trump will react to the paper, but we can have views on the paper itself. And these, to a significant degree, are reflected in what Chris and Andrea have been saying. But I mean, he explains how the orders of magnitude improvement in compute and algorithms and what he calls unhobbling should enable AGI to be reached by 2027. Now, I'm interested in the quote from Sam Altman who said of 2025. Let us hope to goodness that statement from Sam Altman is not correct. And then Aschenbrenner sees the advancing to superintelligent as a sort of almost sort of bygone conclusion after that, having created tens of millions of AI, ASI researchers that can then speed on the creation to superintelligence. But the sobering thing about that paper was that there was no suggestion of pausing until alignment is achieved, but rather it's presented as though superintelligence is a sort of juggernaut that is coming and alignment had better get a move on. And as we all know, and as we've just touched on and as described in Compendium, alignment is extremely difficult to achieve. So, but to proceed to superintelligence without alignment seems utter madness. But it's apparently justified within the major players that are at work here by the need for the democratic US to beat autocratic China and to be the first to achieve superintelligence. One can, in that framing, one can understand the response. The question is, how can we manage to change that framing from competition to win the race to one of global cooperation for the sake of humanity? In 1946, when the world was faced with the dangers of potentially catastrophic new technology, the United States made an unprecedented offer to hand over all its nuclear technology to a supranational body, which would then ensure the control of nuclear weaponry and the deployment of nuclear power for the benefit of the world. But sadly, that did not come about. There was too much distrust between the major powers at the time, and that led to the beginnings of a Cold War and to nuclear warfare that was almost triggered a number of times. But today we're confronted with an extraordinary new technology with the power to, within a short period of time, to bring great benefit to the world, to transform human lives in a way that we have given no serious thought to, and to threaten humanity with catastrophe and possible extinction. So to be sure long term that the last of these outcomes never occurs, many people believe that all countries of the world will need to commit to the establishment of institutions that will protect the world and ensure compliance with the signed treaties. There will be no opportunity to back out of such an agreement, no realistic opportunity for a sudden grab for power, and in effect, a Baruch plan for AI. And so a coalition for a Baruch plan for AI has been formed and is building momentum, and it's something that we've been involved with. The crucial goal overall for everybody, I think, on this call is to rapidly secure a global treaty that works. It need not be perfect long-term because it can be supplemented and grow and develop. But it needs to provide the breathing space for developing more robust permanent solutions. And that is really the essence of Narrow Path Phase 0. And the Coalition for a Baruch Plan for AI has a similar end goal, and I would argue that the differences in approach are probably less significant than the shared concerns and priorities. I believe that campaigns for global AI governance need to work together since there is not sufficient momentum at the moment. At the moment, those in favor of safety are not winning, as we've heard, and we need to change that. So I'd be interested to hear from Chris and Andreas to hear more about your thinking on how to ensure that those in favor of safety are successful. Thank you.
Lots of important, chilling, challenging points there. I will give Chris and Andrea a chance to respond, but before then, I would like to hear from the remaining two panelists. We're going to turn next to Mariana Todorova, who has many hats as well, and one of them is as a member of the core team in the Millennium Projects Initiative to work out scenarios for the governance of the evolution of AI. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me in this webinar this evening. We started in Millennium Project, the AGI project, almost a year and a half ago. And we divided it to 4 components. One is the component of origin of AGI. The other one is about value alignment. The third component is about governance. And of course, the fourth component is about control. We already went through 3 phases. The first phase was about the effort to collect different opinions from the key leader figures who are involved in developing of AGI, like Stuart Russell, Elon Musk, Fei Li, Amoday, and other important people. The second phase was real-time Delphi process, where we collected a lot of opinions from independent experts about these components, and it was a kind of collective intelligence about this issue. And the third phase, in which you also was involved in, was developing different alternative scenarios about who should govern AGI, what is the role of UN, shall we face extinction and annihilation, and etc. But I would like to put a philosophical perspective today, because I believe that we have to delve deeper into the problems about origin and value alignment, and then creating different alternative pathways and path dependencies that are resulting from these pathways, we can conclude if it's possible to control and govern AGI. So the central point from philosophical perspective about AGI is whether consciousness can be achieved either as a reconstruction made by human or as emerging property. Now I can see a new tendency, and it's resulting from neurosciences and projects like Thousands Brains, where the researchers there are ready to divide complex human intelligence and machine intelligence from thinking and reasoning. And this is intentional because there is such theory that people might just withdraw from thinking and follow only the machine intelligence, and this could be our adaptational response to the algorithms. And the third perspective regarding origin is connected to, with the thesis that we could not create consciousness, but AI evolving into AGI could start to mimic and to imitate our consciousness, and it would be very successful. And if this AGI start to mimic and to imitate virtuously our consciousness, the value alignment wouldn't be that hard, because at least this new entity would be very similar to ourselves. But if it's a result of emerging property, then the value alignment might be impossible. And the third problem here is that human adaptation, our adaptational response, whether intentional or unintentional, might be that we are those who will start to mimic and imitate firstly AI and then AGI, not the vice versa. Because if we somehow just give up to try to process the information avalanche, if we could not deal with the rapid change of all the phenomena, and if we don't have the ability to fully process and to reflect on the uncertainties and these permanent changes, and if we couldn't critically analyze everything that might align with all this machine intelligence, then we just can replace our critical analytical thinking with this machine intelligence. We just could deal with rigid machine patterns, and we can become biological algorithms. This is the thesis of Yuval Harari. So we could go through different perspectives. For example, people who are technological optimists, they believe that artificial general intelligence is possible precisely because they view human consciousness and intelligence as emerging property of physical processes only, that are not dependent on any supernatural or immaterial factors. And this perspective aligns with Richard Dawkins' views, which assert that life, consciousness, and intelligence are the products of evolution, and this process is driven by natural selection and devoid of divine intervention or purpose. And in this Dawkins naturalistic view, consciousness is seen as an evolved thread that emerged from complex neural structures in our brain. And because this evolution is random and driven by survival, it does not require a higher or spiritual origin for consciousness. Instead of that, consciousness is just a biological phenomenon, and it could be replicated by machines. We have a completely opposing argument that consciousness is a multidimensional and even spiritual phenomenon. I can see even Ben Gyatso, he's inviting very often spiritual gurus who are talking about consciousness as a multi-layered essence connected to dimensions beyond the physical. And they proposes that we don't have only physical body, but also several subtle bodies, and each is associated with different levels of consciousness and existence. Even there is a quantum consciousness theory that some spiritual, it unites some spiritual and also scientific approaches like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, and you know that they proposes that consciousness operates at a quantum level, and it's not just information processing, it's a quantum state that exists across the multiple dimensions of reality. But if we, and in that case, we still have a cognitive deficit to understand these multi-layers and dimensions, and to repeat it and to embody it into AGI. But what is mostly probable for me to happen soon is that we can create mimic and imitation of consciousness, and if AGI potentially is capable of mimicking human behavior with remarkable accuracy, it will ultimately lack empathy, self-awareness, and intrinsic understanding of human experience. And I saw a lot of new researches that proposes that this would make AGI in many respects similar to sociopaths in clinical psychology, who, due to their lack of emotional depth, often rely on learned behavior to appear as normal. And these sociopaths who studies human reactions only to blend in, and in that case, AGI could analyze vast data sets of human behavior to predict, imitate, and respond in social acceptable ways without truly feeling or understanding emotions. So this imitation, however, it will be sophisticated, but it would be devoid of spontaneity, empathy, and ethical intuition. So as a result, AGI could be genuinely responsible, potentially leading this process, but it might happen that we have to deal with an entity that is very similar to sociopaths who understand perfectly what they do, but they just imitate. They don't correct themselves, and they don't have feelings and empathy. So I know this is a little bit abstract from the topics that we already discussed, but it could give us some essential perspective what could be the manifestations of AGI. So that's why I decided to reflect on that rather than on the other issues of control,
Well, these are important
governance.
issues, and these are important threats. And indeed, sociopaths with superintelligence would be very scary in this world. Thanks very much, Mariana. You've given us a lot more to think about. And let's hear comments from Daniel Fagella.
Absolutely, David. What do we get? 10 minutes?
Yes, and
All right.
we're
Let
going
me
to
see if
run
I
out
can
of
do.
time.
I'll see if I do. I'll see if I can do.
And
less
after this,
time.
I'm going to give everybody 3 or 4 minutes each to try and come back with a few points. It's going to be terribly challenging to address all the good comments in 3 or 4 minutes, but
Yeah.
let's try that.
All right.
In the same order as before, by the way. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll aim to shoot for under 10 here. So lots to think about. David, really appreciate the forum to put this together. I think that you're always bringing a very measured, reflective take on things. I think it's so easy for these conversations to fall into dogma, and that is the absolute opposite of what you do. So happy to be here with everybody. And Andrea, I know you and I are catching up soon, so looking forward to it. And great to be able to get a little bit of review here, just to reflect a few things that kind of come to mind that I think should be put on the table. There's so much I agree with about the 2 reports, and that I think should be more common knowledge. But I'll just kind of touch on some agreements, potentially some areas that I don't think there's agreement on right now, and maybe where a conversation can move forward to make this all fruitful. Some things we agree on. It does seem pretty self-evident that we're in an AGI arms race. I think some people kind of deny that. I think there is an understanding here from at least a few of the speakers. This isn't really about money. I think money is always about power and potential, and AGI is just a straight road to that. And so I think there's a good consensus here that that's what we're working on. And I also think there's a good consensus here that we really need to bind incentives as opposed to pick magically virtuous AGI leaders. I think we can see people who fully understand the risks continuing to play Russian roulette, because right now there are really 2 choices. If you are a billionaire and you have the opportunity to run an AGI lab in the current state of affairs, which we might liken to the state of nature, you can either build and probably, if you're honest with yourself, be killed by your own sand god, or you can be killed by someone else's, a rival's sand god. Those are really your only 2 choices. If you want to sit on the side, that's what you need to do. So we famously have people like, Altman was very pro AGI is going to kill us all, and then he started OpenAI and had to say a different story, right? Musk was very much AGI is going to kill us all. Now he's racing towards it. Why? Because if you only have those 2 choices, that's what you do. If you are a man of their stamp with that degree of ambition, and your only 2 choices are to perish in massive glory by your own hand, or in a final flash of shame by the hand of another, you gotta do the former. It just is what it is. So I think we're all in agreement that we sort of need to bind that and sort of fix that general shebang. I think, in terms of things that I think maybe we can whittle underneath a little bit here, a few things. So we've talked about kind of shocking, terms like godlike AI, which I happen to think might not be an overstatement, might not be hyperbole. Just like animals can't control us and don't understand us. And we've had sort of this the very frank talk of gigantic post-human intelligence, and about essentially the fact that 0 progress has been made on how this can be aligned. And in the same breath, we've been saying, so that humanity is in charge and gets all the benefits. I really think it behooves us to sort of pump the brakes and look frankly at this. I think it's sort of not pleasant to look into the void, and it's not pleasant to say, you know what, when we hand the baton up, it is probable that our fates are just who knows. Now, I'm not saying that we should relegate ourselves to irrelevance. I'm not advocating for that, and I never have for the last 12 years writing about this stuff. But I don't really know if it makes sense for us to all say it's going faster, it's going to be God, and humanity forever will capture all the benefits. This strikes me as strangely disingenuous and borderline impossible, and I don't know why the conversation always goes there. In addition, I think it behooves us to ask the question, to what end? To what end? So we should govern AI so that flourishing. I think there's this almost tacit understanding in this room and in many other rooms that the end is the eternal hominid kingdom. In other words, all of us, we're all sort of almost nodding along as if 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now, the best possible outcome is as many Homo sapiens sapiens alive, maybe happy in a world without war and with autonomous cars as like possible. Now, I'm not like necessarily insulting anyone's vision, but I'm saying we're not going farther than like, yeah, we need to avoid the dangers, make sure humans in eternal control of a God that we know we can't control. That strikes me as a big cognitive dissonance. And I really think we've got to address maybe the frankness of when the baton gets handed off. We're probably cooked. But also I think we need to get under the hood of like, to what end? There's this tacit thing that it's going to be the eternal hominid kingdom, when I think ultimately, we're, in this room, we are more or less all in agreement that the arms race is probably the wrong way to birth whatever is next. We're all in agreement there, that a brute state of nature arms race is not the way. We like that we have police. The analogy that I use, and Andrea brought up some really interesting analogies too, that I really hope to quote in the future that I thought were great. But the analogy I sometimes use is all of this philosophizing about AGI and thinking about potentially better futures. The only reason I can do that here in Boston is because like theft and murder are illegal. Or now, if they weren't, right? If anyone in this apartment building could hypothetically break in and kill me, I would have to just be poised in a corner with a rifle focused only on the acquisition of food and ammunition. And I would not have the ability to philosophize about building a better future, building a business, progressing science, whatever the case may be. Similarly, in the international state of affairs, we haven't found any way to bind incentives. And I think it is sometimes framed that any amount of that would imply a tyranny. And I don't think that that's the case. But let's assume we get there. And I think we all can say, yeah, let's get these treaties in place. We had our Robert here talking about, we need to sort of move forward, get to some degree of that treaty. All for it, brother. To what end? And I think we could almost imagine two poles. One pole would be the eternal hominid kingdom, an unending multi-billion-year streak of hominids as they are, jealous, having to go to the bathroom, trimming fingernails in different galaxies. That's one pole. The other pole would be the continual blooming of potentia. So I'm really glad that from a sea snail, I eventually bubbled up, probably because I would behoove, David, if you were still a sea snail, you would probably not be able to facilitate conversations of the current depth that we're being able to enjoy together. And I think that bubbling up, I'm very grateful that bubbling up happened to me. And actually, I think it would probably be wrong if it never bubbled further. Now, I'm not in the camp that all bubbling is to net good. I am not. I think many of our successors could be unworthy, but I think some could be worthy. And so what is the weight? I'll end on this point. What is the relative weight as we move forward of how much weight do we place on the eternal hominid kingdom, the number of living hominids who trim their toenails, versus the continual blooming of the state space of good and possible powers and potential? Is it 100% on hominid survival and 0% on the continual blooming of intelligence? Is it 90-10? I won't put anything on the table. I'm not going to give everybody a percentage, but I will say 100 and 0, I believe, would be overtly morally wrong. And I think it's almost as if this conversation is suspecting that that's the case. So when we do sort of, if and when there is some consensus around a degree of governance, to what end? By golly gee, I think that's an important conversation to ask about. And I suspect it probably should start early. So that's it for me, David. 8 minutes and 14 seconds.
Very impressive. Lots to think about. Now, we are going to run out of time. We're going to go over our limits a little bit, I think. Let's see what we can do in terms of responses in about 3 or 4 minutes each to any point that you want to pick on. So I would urge everybody, if possible, to focus on positive proposals rather than more, gosh, this is also difficult, isn't it? So let's start with Chris, and we'll go around the speakers, panelists in the same order.
So we've done an hour and 25 minutes and mostly just raised a ton of questions and probably a lot of new information for many people. And so this to me points to two things. The first is the generally profound state of ignorance that humanity is in facing the chapter ahead. things are moving really fast. No one really knows what's going on. Who knows what kind of future we're headed towards, or even what kind of future humanity would agree on if we sat down in a room and had long enough to sort that out. To me, the like extrapolation from this is like, hey, we're not ready to answer these questions. We need to put a lot more thought, a lot more time into figuring out how to build a just process to figure out how humanity can even agree on the type of future that it wants. But right now we're barreling towards one without that consent. So to your final point, Daniel, I think there is a sense in which if we're asking the question of what the future utopia should look like, this is a spiritual question. This is something that comes down to people's like deep sense of what it means to be human and alive and conscious and what the future holds. And like, we know humanity does not have agreement on these questions. Like, this is just obviously the state of reality. So I'm in the camp of like, we shouldn't try to answer those questions right now. We should try to get to a future where it's possible for humanity to be the ones who are answering those questions, instead of just de facto handing those over to whatever natural process is occurring, which right now seems to be the AGI race. So that's like point one on ignorance. Let's try to get less ignorant. And what that means for people who are interested in participating in working to reduce the risks from AGI is largely right now a matter of education and communication. Not many people know about this subject. Some people think it's science fiction entirely. But the risks are real and there are people working on them all over the world. And so if you want to do something about this, the best thing to do is to get informed, read a lot, and make yourself into the type of person who is capable of helping more. Because if you just learn about the problems and have a kind of bulk of information, doesn't mean you know how to run a company, doesn't mean you know how to talk to politicians. All of those are hard skills that are absolutely necessary to make a difference, and where I think people should look if they'd like to participate more. So I'll close there.
Very concise, and thanks to panelists for putting links, and indeed audience members for putting links in the text where some of this conversation can continue on a slightly longer timescale. In particular, I'll highlight the Discord that is available from Control AI. And Eva Pascoe is pointing to a participatory AI workbench for non-experts run by King's College. You can look that up as well. Andrea, what points would you like to emphasize?
Yeah, I'll try to be super quick since there's so many good questions and so many good points. Yeah, like quickly, also as I replied in the chat, Dan, I agree. I think very often there's this situation where people go like, yeah, well, we're building God, we're building a country of geniuses on a data center, and that's the lower bound of what we're building, and we're going to harness it to create great shareholder value and human flourishing. This is why the narrow path's answer is like, no, obviously, if we build God, God is going to run the universe. For now, I want to give humans a chance to stay in control and to decide with a just process their future. I think we shouldn't build God. This is why phase 0 of narrow path is no superintelligence until we're ready. And being ready means all of the institutions in place, and also having in place a just process for humanity to decide what the next stage is on that. And I think much more okay than you with the eternal hominid kingdom or something else. I also just think we can't make this decision right now, and definitely we shouldn't let one or two people kind of gamble with all of our lives for something that might be completely unworthy, and we are definitely not on track. But yeah, let's not build God for now. Let's build AI tools that help us. Tools are good, non-tools are successor species. On Richard's points, you asked like a lot of very good questions on the specifics of the proposals. It would take quite a long time to go into all of them, but quickly, like one very interesting one that you brought up is in the track to diplomacy dialogues between China and the US that you mentioned. That for the audience, they're called IDAS. They identified 5 red lines where Chinese and Western, like US and British scientists actually agree on AI. And for the audience, I will recap them. It's no autonomous replication or improvement, no power seeking, no assisting weapon development, no cyber attacks, no deception. They're in many ways quite similar. It's kind of like a convergence to also like what we came up with in our path. The few differences are like chiefly technical. I don't think deception is a very measurable thing, and I don't think it's a necessary condition. I think definitely the conditions are perhaps what we're seeking were like necessary and sufficient conditions. So kind of the minimum that we really need to put in place. So this is why we agree with them completely. No autonomous improvement, that kind of common sense. Replication and breaking out of your environment are quite similar. To replicate yourself, you need to be able to crack out of your computer environment. It's the same skills. And there's a legal precedent in the US with a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that already says that it's illegal to have, self-replicating worms, botnet behavior, and so on. So we can just apply that completely existing big body of legal precedent to AIs and say like, no, you can't have an AI. They can just crack out of its environment. They can just replicate itself and go around. Assisting with weapon development, a very meritorious red line, although it doesn't have to do much with superintelligence. Our path is really laser focused on superintelligence, leaves aside a lot of other issues with AI, such as AI weapons. Cyber attacks, goes back to the don't break out of its environment. And power seeking is another concept that I think is a little bit difficult to trace, and especially trace in advance. And this is why we were a bit more grounded with this: no improvement, no hack out of its environment, and limited general intelligence of the systems. Kind of minimal, necessary, and sufficient conditions to prevent superintelligence. And thank you. And unfortunately, no time to answer all the questions, but there's a lot of good ones. Thank you.
I will put some of these questions online afterwards in a format that more people can see them. But Robert, since you had some feedback on your comments from Andrea just now, I'll give you the microphone for a fairly quick set of replies.
Thank you. So first of all, with that from Andrea, I'm glad I didn't make a mistake. So you've agreed that you haven't consciously excluded deception and power seeking, but I'm surprised, I continue to be surprised, and would argue strongly. I mean, for instance, deception, there was recently an example found in a recent OpenAI system where the system, actively was seeking to deceive the evaluation. Now, it didn't fail because it was being monitored, but if the fact that it showed the desire to deceive means that the next step is that it does that, but without having a script, and it succeeds in deceiving. So I think they are really serious. In terms of the points that Daniel made and the hominy, I think we're all agreed. Nobody who proposes flourishing does not mean to say flourishing, no change, and eternal hominid kingdom. I think Toby Ord had a clear vision of, first of all, protecting against current existential risks, then finding ways of avoiding any existential risk emerging, sort of seeing it coming and being able to stop it. And once humanity is in that sort of safer position, he then talked about a 200-year period of deep reflection as to there are masses of questions that we have no answers for in the moment. We need to think about this seriously. It does not mean to say we don't evolve, but we should evolve in a way that we choose to evolve, not because somebody from OpenAI imposes it upon us. And thirdly, going back to Chris and his sort of concluding remarks, I totally agree. Clearly everybody needs to get engaged, and this struggle for safety over blind madness, in my view, and we need to exercise our agency. We have agency. We need to exercise it and not believe that this is something for somebody else.
Thanks. Mariana, final thoughts?
That some existential risks might appear only from creating different jurisdictions and approaches, and it could lead to a chaos and mess. And I can see that even now, because, for example, the face recognition is forbidden here in Europe, but it's not forbidden in the States or in South Korea or in China. And if a person could be pointed as a criminal using this as an evidence in the States. Here in Europe, it couldn't, and this is only a single example that our perception of AI and the risks could lead to a bigger chaos on this level, only on jurisdiction level, not on the basis that AI create risks itself. So we need such kind of discussions on different levels, and I don't see a kind of unification in approaches, even on the basic documents that were elaborated, like European Commission document, Biden Act, Bletchley Declaration. They have, of course, something in common, but they have different approaches, and I think this might also represent a risk itself.
I think that's an important point. We don't know whether we can do things top down or bottom up. I think it's appropriate to encourage experimentation, but to keep a very close eye on possible unexpected consequences of these things. And whenever we spot possible improvements that can be made, we shouldn't be too proud to adopt improvements from elsewhere in the world. And that is what's meant to be happening, I think, in San Francisco in 10 days' time, as was pointed out, the meeting of AI safety institutes. Let's hope that they're going to have sufficient open minds, sufficient agility, and sufficient urgency to take advantage of whatever each of them has learned. And let's hope that they're also honest enough to report their failures. One of the problems in this field is that when failures occur, people often try and cover it up and say, well, it wasn't here really. And unless we have that honest reporting, we're going to end up with a much bigger problem. Dan, final comments from you.
Yeah, I'll just chip in quickly. I appreciate it. I know Chris is out of here, but Chris and Andrea kind of chipping in there, and Richard as well. It does sound like there's some. Oh, Robert, yeah. I think Toby's sort of notion, I think, is a good one. I just recently wrapped up a series of interviews called Worthy Successor with Bostrom and Joscha Bach and Anders Sandberg and Richard Sutton and a bunch of others. There's this common notion among all of them of sort of, hey, if we calibrate it right, maybe we'll be able to have our happy little corner and AGI will kind of go off. Part of me wonders if this dialogue, and I'm openly wondering this, I don't know the answer, I think it's just worth putting on the table. If in order to get to global governance, we almost have to squelch down sort of like the really, what does this mean? Because we're talking about God level AI and then we're saying humanity in charge and get all the benefits. And again, for me, it's just like those two sentences, I can't do it. I can't do the cognitive dissonance. I can't say those, frankly. I have to sort of be frank about, like, we're moving in a direction where it's less of humanity with the steering wheel forever and it's more of maybe lightly bending the trajectory. But I wonder if we got to keep it in baby food mode to get people into global governance, because no one's going to want to do global governance if they have to look at the void. There's a part of me that's like, does it have to be like, does it have to be this kind of team humans, kind of light and friendly? You know, it's always going to be like a little remote control car for us. Do we have to keep the conversation there in order to get to that treaty? I wonder if we have to subjugate the real implications long-term and keep things kind of soft and friendly for the everyman in the near term. Maybe we do. I don't know if I'll be capable of keeping the conversation there, but it does strike me like maybe that's necessary. So something to chew on.
So we need skills in communications, or marketing, or finding the right level of message for each different audience. And it'll be different messages for different audiences. So it's not just we need to be good at science, good at understanding risk. We need to be good at communicating science and communicating risks. And you're all stars in that, and I thank you for that. I'm going to give maybe up to 30 seconds if you have any final comments. You don't need to speak. And what we're going to do next is we'll formally close after that final round of comments. And I know most people will have to leave, but I will stay. And if any of the audience wants to stay and raise your questions again, I and whoever else is still here will give you the microphone. You can turn on your cameras if you wish. We will take a 5-10 minute comfort break in between, but let's see if there's any more burning comments from any of the four who are still here.
Just saying quickly, thank you. I also will have to leave soon. On your point about marketing and communication, I think honestly, we just need many more people to be honest about this stuff. Even before going to the marketing and adapting the messages. Like so many people that have known about these risks and the challenges we face have spent a lot of time essentially obfuscating, especially the people in the companies are doing that. I appreciate having these kind of honest conversations. And if we had more of these, we would be in a much better spot. Most people get the risks if you explain to them. Most people don't want a state of nature and a race. Let's be honest, and let's get our words to travel far, and let's reach many people. And anybody else in the audience, just like talk with your friends, talk with your family, talk with your elected officials about this stuff if you care about it. And we need you. And thank you very much, David, and thank you very much everybody else, Dan, Mariana, Robert, for the time today.
Thank you.
So sugarcoating has its limitations and drawbacks. It's better as far as possible, as quickly as possible, to get on to the honest truth. Robert, did you want to jump in?
Well, my feeling was that, in the last few years, the words used haven't been particularly extreme, and on the whole, it's got to where we are, which is, there's very, very little time, and so if the going gently wasn't working, then it seems that maybe more extreme wording is necessary. But I accept Dan's point that maybe it may be counterproductive if people sort of back away. But the problem is that we're not making enough progress as it is.
Mariana, any final thoughts? No?
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for being here, Mariana, and I will point again to the ongoing work that the Millennium Project is doing. Jerome Glenn put a comment with a link in the chat to that. Dan, anything else to say, or shall we call it quits?
No, we can wrap it up. I really appreciate you facilitating the conversation here. It's great to be able to hear everybody's takes.
Well, thanks to everybody for sharing your insights honestly, provocatively, thoughtfully. And we will continue to discuss this in London Futurists with urgency and hopefully with skill and finesse too, until we have got that safety and security that will allow us to look at the harder, deeply philosophical, deeply spiritual questions with more leisure and with more time. And as I said, we're going to pause now, but if people are still here in 7 minutes time, I will start up an informal discussion where we can dig a little bit more discursively into some of these points. But thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much.